The Christmas card lay on the kitchen counter, glossy and heavy with gold trimming, but when I opened it, my name was gone. The card showed my family gathered around the fireplace in David's house, their smiles bright, the children lined up, in perfect rows, the tree glittering behind them. I studied every face and every detail until my stomach clenched. I was cropped out. They had chosen a photograph taken during last year's Christmas Eve, the night I sang one last time for my grandchildren, holding my old silver microphone in the living room. But in this polished version, my figure was cut neatly away. It was as though I had never been there. My name is Irene Callahan. I am 75 years old, and once, in the decades of the 60s and 70s, I sang in lounges and hotel bars across the Midwest. My voice was never famous enough for records, but it was known well enough for men returning from war to stop, sit, and let me carry them through their grief. I gave that up when I married and raised my children, trading the glow of a stage for the rhythm of a household. For decades, I believed that sacrifice meant something, that my children would remember the woman who gave up applause so they could have stability. Yet here I was, erased by the very people I had given everything for. It was David, my eldest, who had mailed the cards. David, the businessman, the polished one with his tailored suits and his calculated smile. He had grown ambitious beyond measure. In recent years, whispering about a seat on the city council, speaking of our family as though it were his brand to polish. His wife, Evelyn, stood at his side in the photograph, her hand resting lightly on his arm, the embodiment of control hidden behind charm. Evelyn was the one who loved appearances, who once told me bluntly that my lounge days were not the kind of legacy that matched David's future. Seeing the card, I could almost hear her voice, cold and certain, shaping the decision. Remove her. Erase her. Let the world see only what we want. I held that card longer than I should have. The edges bit into my hand, the gloss shining like mockery under the kitchen light. My first instinct was disbelief. Surely, they had sent me the wrong copy, a misprint. But when I called Linda, my daughter, her response was quick and rehearsed. She said she was sorry if I felt left out, that it wasn't intentional, that the photographer had adjusted for space, as though I were nothing more than clutter in a picture-perfect tableau. Linda had always been the creative one, the one who dabbled with cameras and editing software. She was working on some grand documentary about family values for an independent network, and she carried herself like she was curating history itself. I could hear the impatience in her voice, as if my protest was inconvenient, as if I should know better than to question her version of events. I thought of my youngest, Thomas, the boy who once sat at the edge of my bed, begging me to sing him lullabies long after he was too old. Thomas, who had once picked up a guitar and dreamed of following music himself, only to stumble, to fail, and to resent the shadow of my voice. He hadn't called in weeks. He wasn't in the card either, at least not cropped. He was centered, smiling, a hand on his nephew's shoulder, part of the polished whole. They had all gathered without me. The absence of my name cut deeper than I admitted. It wasn't only the photograph, it was the mailing list, friends, neighbors, the old church community. Everyone who received that card would see the family and think of me as already gone. To be alive and erased is a cruelty sharper than death. That night, I pulled out my old box of keepsakes. At the very bottom lay the microphone, silver dulled by years, but still heavy in my palm. I remembered holding it in smoky rooms, my voice carrying over clinking glasses, the way it warmed under stage lights, the way audiences leaned forward as if I were telling their secret. I pressed it to my lips and whispered into the silence of my kitchen. My voice cracked, old and unsteady, but it was mine. The phone rang just as I was lost in that memory. It was David. His tone was warm at first, rehearsed like a campaign speech. He asked if I had received the card. I answered yes. He said something about unity, about the importance of presenting a cohesive image. Then, without pause, he slipped in a sentence that revealed more than he intended. You know, Mom, sometimes certain histories don't need to be front and center anymore. I froze. History's my history. He was not speaking of space in a photograph. He was speaking of erasure. Evelyn's words, David's ambition, Linda's editing, they were all connected. It was not an accident. It was a decision. I remembered last year's Christmas Eve, how Evelyn had rolled her eyes when I brought out the microphone, how David had stiffened when the grandchildren clapped. I had thought it was harmless nostalgia. Now I saw it differently. To them, my voice was not a treasure but a blemish. a reminder of smoky rooms and working-class grit, a past too raw for their polished image. I walked through my house that night, the silence pressing down on me. The walls were lined with framed photographs from decades past: birthdays, weddings, graduations. I noticed how many of them had already shifted focus. Pictures of David shaking hands at fundraisers, Linda holding cameras at events, Thomas pretending confidence at music gigs. In none of them was I central anymore. Always at the edge, always fading. I sat in my armchair, the cards still clutched in my hand. My anger grew, but so did something else: clarity. They wanted me gone, not physically, but from memory. They wanted to reshape the narrative, to build a family legend without the inconvenient truth of a mother who had once sung for soldiers and drifters, who had once dared to be more than just their caretaker. I considered tearing the card apart, throwing it into the fire, but I did not. Instead, I placed it beside the microphone on my table. Let them sit together, the glossy erasure and the tarnished proof of existence. One false, one true. Later, when I stepped outside, the neighborhood was glowing with holiday lights, wreaths on doors, carolers on corners, children chasing each other in the snow. A neighbor waved and called out a cheerful greeting, but I could not answer. All I could think of was the card traveling through mailboxes, being pinned to fridges, displayed on mantles. Every person who saw it would believe the story it told. A perfect family. Without me. That was the night I stopped being merely hurt. That was the night I felt the first burn of resolve. Because the truth was not gone. It lived in my voice, in the memories of those who had heard me, in the songs that carried men through nights of war. They could crop me from photographs, strip my name from recordings, polish their image until it gleamed like glass, but they could not change what had been lived. I looked again at the silver microphone, its surface catching the faint light from the street lamp outside. To them, it was just clutter, an embarrassing relic. To me, it was proof that I had existed, fully, loudly, with a voice that mattered. And I knew then, if they were determined to erase me, I would have to remind them, and the world, of who I was. The Christmas card was meant to silence me. Instead, it gave me reason to speak. The card was still on my kitchen table when another wound came. Linda called, her voice brisk, layered with the false warmth she had perfected for her film projects. She said she wanted me to watch something, an early cut of the documentary she had been working on. It's about us, she said, about the Callahan family. I agreed, though my stomach already tightened. When the file arrived, I pressed play. The screen filled with images of childhood birthdays, graduations, and neatly curated moments. Then, midway through, a voice rose from the speakers, rich and familiar. My voice, not from the last years, but from those nights long ago when I sang, under dim lights, when the microphone was the only thing that steadied me. I recognized the recording instantly. It was from an old cassette, tucked in a box in my attic. Somehow, it had left my house and landed in my daughter's hands. I listened carefully, waiting for my name. But there was no mention, no caption, no credit. The screen simply read, "Anonymous voice of resilience." She had taken the sound that defined me, stripped it of identity, and pinned it to her story as though it belonged to no one. I called her immediately. She answered quickly, as if she knew the storm was coming. I told her she had no right. She countered with calm phrases, speaking as though she were soothing a child. "It's bigger this way, Mom. It's not about one person. It's about the universal spirit. Don't you want your voice to inspire everyone without the burden of a name?" I nearly dropped the phone from the fury building in my hand. My voice was not a symbol to be carved out of me. It had carried men who returned from jungles and deserts, broken in ways they could not name. It had filled nights for strangers who needed to believe morning would come. Now my own daughter was repackaging it as a nameless backdrop for her career. The next day, I searched the attic, where my old things had been stored for decades. The box was open, the tapes shifted, the order disturbed. She had been here. I pictured her walking into my house with a key. David insisted on keeping 4 emergencies. She must have rummaged through my history with no more hesitation than browsing a library shelf. That evening, David called again. He asked why I was upsetting Linda, why I couldn't support her work. His tone was heavy with irritation cloaked as reason. He said her film could help his campaign, that it would present our family as strong, enduring, honorable. When I told him she had stolen from me, he said, It's not stealing if it makes everyone look good. I hung up. I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the silence of my home. Every corner of it was filled with memories, yet each one was now at risk of being rewritten or erased. At church that Sunday, Pastor John greeted me kindly, as he always had. He had been around for years, watching my children grow. He noticed the stiffness in my posture and asked if something was troubling me. For a moment I considered telling him everything: the card, the film, the theft. But when I opened my mouth, the words stuck. I realized how impossible it was to explain that your own children were dismantling you piece by piece. Instead, I nodded and told him I was fine. The lie felt heavy, but I carried it out of pride, not trust. When I returned home, another envelope waited. It was an invitation, embossed and elegant, to the private screening of Linda's documentary. My name was printed neatly among the guests, not as a subject, but as an attendee. I was invited to sit and watch as my life was narrated by others, my voice drifting through the speakers without belonging to me. That night, I placed the silver microphone on the table beside the card. Together they seemed to mock me, one proof of erasure, the other proof of existence. I could feel the weight of both pressing against me. I thought of Thomas, the child who once idolized my songs, who used to strum along on a battered guitar in his room. He had fallen silent in recent years, distant, ashamed of his failures. I wondered if he knew what his sister had done, if he cared. But no call came, no voice reached me. The following morning, I went to the market. As I stood in line, I overheard two women speaking about the upcoming film. One of them said, "I can't wait to hear that anonymous singer. What a story." They spoke of me, and yet not of me. I wanted to shout across the aisle that it was my voice, that those songs had names and nights behind them. Instead, I walked out with my groceries, the sound of their excitement ringing louder than any applause I once knew. Days passed, with messages from Linda, reminding me of the screening. She said it would be a beautiful tribute, that I should be proud. Each word felt like acid on paper. Pride was not what I felt. It was theft wrapped in a bow. On the morning of the screening, I stood before the mirror, holding the microphone in my hand. My reflection was older, lined, worn, but the weight in my grip was the same as it had been 50 years ago. That microphone had carried my voice across countless nights. Now it was all I had left to remind me of who I had been. I did not attend the screening. Instead, I waited in my house, the walls closing in, the air sharp with betrayal. I imagined the audience applauding, praising Linda's vision, speaking of the nameless voice that carried the film. They would never know it was mine unless I told them. The phone rang that evening. It was Evelyn. Her tone was velvet, but I knew the steel beneath. She said it was best this way, that my presence would have complicated things, that the film was already being praised. "It's for David's future," she said. "Surely you understand sacrifices." Sacrifices. I had made them all my life, and now even my voice was being offered up as another. But this time, I felt something shift. The hurt was there, yes, but beneath it burned a spark of defiance. They thought they could silence me by stripping away credit, by cropping me out of pictures, by renaming me as nothing. But they had forgotten something. I was still here. I was not a ghost, not a faceless echo. I was flesh, bone, and voice. As I sat in the quiet of my house, I spoke into the microphone, though it was not connected to anything. My voice filled the room, cracked and imperfect, but alive. And in that sound, I knew I was not finished. The first time I realized Thomas had betrayed me, it was not in a living room argument or a family dinner. It was on a glowing screen late at night when I stumbled across a video of him performing in a dimly lit bar downtown. Someone had shared the link on social media, tagged with praise for his raw, authentic storytelling. I clicked out of idle curiosity, only to hear my own life sung back to me, my words, my memories, but no trace of my name. Thomas was my youngest. The boy who once begged for lullabies, who used to sit cross-legged on the floor while I sang until his eyes drooped shut. He had grown up chasing the echo of those nights, clutching a guitar and scribbling lyrics in notebooks that piled around his bed. But adulthood had not been kind to him. His career never bloomed, his efforts faltered, and the shadow of my own past seemed to weigh heavier on him than on anyone else. In the video, he leaned into the microphone with practiced weariness, strumming a melody I knew too well. It was the tune I had hummed to him when his fever spiked one winter night, a rhythm that carried him through pain. Yet here, it was renamed, repackaged as a song called The Stranger's Prayer. The lyrics twisted the lullaby into something detached, the story of a nameless woman whispering comfort to a nameless child. The crowd clapped, not knowing it was born from my hands, my voice, my nights of rocking him to sleep. I felt my breath hitch as the performance continued. Verse after verse poured out details only I had lived. The woman in the blue dress who sang under neon lights, the echo of footsteps in empty streets after midnight, the soldier who left a folded flag on a piano bench. These were not myths. They were fragments of my life. Stories I had shared with Thomas in the intimacy of our conversations. I had told him those things because I trusted him, because I believed he carried respect for my past even if he could not match it. But on that stage, he spoke of them as if they belonged to him, as if he had invented them. He gave credit to no one, not even the ghost of acknowledgement. The applause rose, and he bowed, smiling faintly, as though he had finally found the recognition that had eluded him. The betrayal pressed harder because I had always defended him. When David dismissed him as a failure, when Linda rolled her eyes at his half-finished projects, I reminded them that everyone walked a different path, that he needed patience. I had been his shield, and now, in return, he had taken my memories and dressed them as his own. I decided I needed to see him with my own eyes. A week later, he announced another show at a small venue not far from downtown. The flyer was flashy, promising Thomas Callahan, original songs, true stories. My heart twisted at the word original. Still, I went. The bar was crowded, sticky floors and cheap beer, the kind of place I had known too well decades ago. I slipped into the back, unseen in the dim light, while Thomas tuned his guitar on stage. He looked older than I remembered, lines carved deeper around his mouth, a wariness in his shoulders. But when he began to play, the years fell away. He was the boy again, chasing approval. Song after song carried echoes of my life. One number described a woman waiting by the phone for a call that never came, a direct retelling of nights I had confessed to him, when I waited for word from a soldier who never returned. Another piece painted the picture of a smoky room, a silver microphone glinting under lights. The audience gasped at the detail, as if it were a brilliant invention. They had no idea he was reciting my existence. When he paused between songs, he spoke to the crowd. These stories, he said, come from fragments I've collected, from people I've known, from a past I've inherited. Inherited. That word struck like glass breaking. He positioned my life as raw material, something passed down like hand-me-downs, but never honored as mine. I left before the set ended, the sound of applause chasing me into the street. The cold night air bit into me, but it was nothing compared to the hollow throb in my chest. Back home, I found a new email waiting. It was from Linda, praising Thomas's show and suggesting we all support him as part of the family brand. She wrote that his songs would pair beautifully with her documentary, that together they could create a narrative of resilience. My voice, stripped of name. My stories, stripped of ownership. My children, building a house of lies on my foundation while pushing me outside its walls. The next day, I confronted Thomas. He answered the door of his small apartment, guitar propped in the corner, papers scattered on the table. He looked startled to see me, then wary. I asked him directly why he had taken my stories. He shifted, unable to meet my gaze. Finally, he muttered, "You gave them to me. You told me all those things. I didn't steal. I just used what was given." Used, I repeated. The word stung. Memories entrusted in love, transformed into material, stripped of recognition. He insisted he was honoring me, that the audience wouldn't care if the songs were mine, that attaching my name would only confuse things. No one wants to hear about a 75-year-old singer from Lounge's mom. They want the feeling, not the facts. His words cut deeper than he knew. He had taken not only my past but my legitimacy. To him, my truth was inconvenient, outdated, disposable. I left his apartment without another word. On the walk home, I saw shop windows filled with Christmas decorations, couples laughing, children tugging at coats. The world spun on, unaware of the private theft unraveling inside my family. The night I returned to the microphone on my table, I traced the cool metal with my fingers, remembering nights when Thomas sat wide-eyed, begging for just one more song. He had loved my voice then, he had needed it. And now he had turned it into a tool to carve out his own relevance. leaving me faceless. I told myself I would not cry, but my throat ached with unshed grief, not just for the songs, but for the boy I had believed would never betray me. The silence in the room was heavier than any crowd's applause. I knew, then, that this was not coincidence. David, Linda, Thomas, each of them was reshaping me to suit their ambitions, and Evelyn, with her calculating gaze, was no doubt pulling threads from behind the curtain. One by one, my children had decided that the woman I truly was could not coexist with the image they wanted to build. They had not just left me out of a card, they were writing me out of history. It was a Thursday afternoon when the letter came. A thick envelope with a law firm's crest stamped across the top, addressed neatly to me. At first, I thought it was some mistake, perhaps an advertisement, or a notice for something unrelated. But when I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out the documents inside, my eyes froze on the first line. It read, "Agreement of Transfer of Rights." The pages detailed the sale of a set of old recordings, specifically unpublished audio materials belonging to Irene Callahan, my name, printed in bold letters, my signature, inked at the bottom, except it wasn't mine. The signature leaned at an angle, the strokes too sharp, the letters misshapen. It was a forgery, but to any stranger's eye, it might have passed. Sat at my kitchen table, the weight of the papers pressing into my chest. I flipped through the pages, one after another, until I saw David's name listed as my legal guardian and financial representative. My breath caught. Legal guardian representative. I had never appointed him, never given away that authority. Called him immediately. He answered with his smooth tone, practiced like a man already campaigning. I asked about the documents. He paused for half a second, just enough for me to catch the calculation before he spoke. "It's nothing, Mom, just routine paperwork. Those tapes in the attic, well, they weren't being used. I made sure they found a home where they can do some good." "Some good," I repeated, my voice shaking. "You sold them. You signed my name." He sighed, the kind of sigh that carried superiority, the kind meant to quiet opposition. "It's complicated. You don't understand how the industry works. Linda's film is creating attention. Thomas is finally finding an audience. We need to streamline the rights to keep everything clean. It's easier if I'm the point of contact. No one wants to negotiate with someone who doesn't fully grasp the process." His words cut not just the theft, but the dismissal, as if age had stripped me of reason, as if I had no right to defend my own creations, my own past. I told him firmly that I had never given him permission, that the documents were fraud. He countered, his tone cooling. "Mom, do you really want to cause trouble over this? People are looking at us now. Any scandal could ruin opportunities for all of us. Sometimes, silence is the greater gift." I hung up without another word. My hands shook as I placed the papers on the table beside the microphone, beside the Christmas card. 3 objects now, each one another stone laid on top of me. The card that erased me, the film that stole my voice, and now the contract that stripped my rights. I could not sit still. That evening, I drove to the address listed for the law firm. The office was modern, glass walls shining in the night. I walked inside, clutching the envelope, and demanded answers. The receptionist looked uncomfortable, called for someone higher. Eventually, a man in a dark suit appeared, adjusting his tie as he greeted me with forced politeness. I placed the contract on his desk and asked if he had truly believed that signature was mine. He glanced at the papers, then back at me, and smiled tightly. "All documents we receive are presumed valid, Mrs. Callahan. If your representative signed them, then my representative." I cut in. "Who told you David Callahan was my representative?" He cleared his throat, choosing his words carefully. "Your son provided the necessary paperwork. A medical note confirming diminished capacity." The room tilted. My grip tightened on the edge of the desk. Diminished capacity, a lie written on a sheet of paper, reducing me to someone unfit to make decisions. They had not only taken my recordings, they had declared me incapable of controlling my own life. I walked out of the office with my heart pounding against my ribs. The air outside was sharp, slicing into me, but I hardly noticed. My own son had painted me as incompetent, as though my mind had already faded, to justify stealing what was mine. At home, I searched every drawer, every file cabinet, looking for my medical records. Nothing had changed. I had no diagnosis, no condition that could justify such a claim. Yet in some office, in some filing system, there now existed a document branding me powerless. I could not sleep that night. I sat in my chair, the contract on the table, the microphone glinting faintly beside it. I thought of the years I had given, 40 years of marriage, 3 children raised, endless sacrifices. I had put away my career, buried my ambitions, for them, and now, in return, they had taken my name, my voice, my rights. The next morning, I went to the market again, trying to ground myself in the ordinary, but whispers followed me down the aisles. A neighbor approached with a smile, congratulating me on finally being recognized in the music community again. She said she had heard my tapes were being archived by a cultural foundation, courtesy of David's arrangement. She thought it was wonderful. I nodded stiffly, the lie burning my tongue. On my way out, I passed a newspaper stand. A small article caught my eye. Local businessman David Callahan partners with media projects to honor family legacy. His picture beamed from the page, Evelyn at his side, Linda's name in the text. Thomas mentioned briefly. There was no mention of me, except as the source of anonymous archival material. I tore the paper in half and left it on the sidewalk. That evening, I received another call, this time from Evelyn. Her voice was silk, her words honed like blades. She said the arrangements were for my own good, that at my age it was best to let others handle such matters. The world is different now, she said softly. We're protecting your legacy in the way that makes sense today. You wouldn't want to complicate things, would you? I bit my tongue to keep from shouting. I realized then that Evelyn was not just complicit, she was directing it. David may have signed the papers, but Evelyn had orchestrated the justification, the framing, the lies. She wanted me gone not because she despised me personally, but because my truth interfered with the image she was sculpting. After she hung up, I sat alone with the silence. My anger pulsed hot, but beneath it was something colder, resolve. They had underestimated me. They thought age made me weak, silence made me harmless. But they had forgotten that my voice once carried through smoke-filled rooms, over clinking glasses, into the hearts of broken men who believed they were beyond saving. That voice had not died. I lifted the microphone once more. Its weight was steady in my hands. Into the stillness, I spoke aloud. They think I am finished. They think they can sign me away. But I am not done. The words echoed in the empty house, strong enough to remind me that though they had stripped my name from paper, they had not stripped it from me. Snow had started to fall heavier that week, blanketing the streets in silence. I stayed indoors, most days, the microphone still on my table, the forged contract folded beside it, the Christmas card tucked under both. It felt as though my whole life had been reduced to these symbols, one of erasure, one of theft, one of proof. Then came the knock at my door. When I opened it, I was stunned to see Helen Morris standing there. Her coat was dusted with snow, her scarf wrapped tight, her eyes sharp and searching as if time had not touched her. We had once sung together, years ago in lounges that no longer exist, our voices blending in smoky rooms where no one cared about pedigree or politics. I had not seen her in decades. Irene, she said, her voice steady but heavy, we need to talk. I let her in, still reeling from the sight of her. She glanced around my small living room, as though measuring the years that had passed. Then her gaze fell on the table, where the microphone sat. She smiled faintly, almost sadly. You still have it, she murmured. We sat, 2 women bound by memories of music that our children would never understand. She took off her gloves and leaned forward. I didn't come to reminisce, she said. I came because I heard something you need to know. I waited, my chest tightening. Helen told me she had been approached recently by a local writer who was working on a commissioned biography about the Callahan family. At first she thought nothing of it, until the writer mentioned the request had come from David and Linda together. The project's purpose was to establish a clean, consistent family narrative to accompany Linda's documentary and David's campaign. According to the writer's notes, the draft included me only as a supportive wife and mother, never as a performer. The lounges, the nights of music, the soldiers, the long hours of singing gone, they're rewriting you, Helen said bluntly. They want you to vanish from your own life story. I felt the words slam into me. Erasure from a photograph was one thing, having my voice stolen another. But this was annihilation at a deeper level. They weren't just cropping or muting me. They were scripting a false history where I had never existed beyond the kitchen and the crib. Helen reached into her bag and pulled out photocopied pages. She slid them across the table. My hands trembled as I read. There I was, described only as a quiet, devoted homemaker who supported her children tirelessly. The passages that should have been mine about music, about sacrifice, about the life I had lived before them, were replaced with platitudes. I read aloud one line that nearly stopped my heart. Her true legacy is her children, not her past. Helen's eyes hardened. They're trying to bury you, Irene. Completely, I looked at her, searching for some sign that she was mistaken, but the pages were undeniable. My children, with Evelyn guiding the pen behind them, had commissioned a biography that transformed me into an accessory to their narrative. They wanted the world to believe I had never been anything but silent support. I asked Helen why she had come. She sighed. Because I couldn't stand to see it happen without you knowing. We were there together. We sang those nights. You mattered, and I won't let them erase that. For the first time in weeks, I felt tears burn my eyes. Not from weakness, but from the recognition that someone remembered me as I truly was. We spoke long into the evening. Helen told me she had heard whispers that Evelyn was orchestrating everything, pushing the biography, shaping Linda's film, urging David to lean on this curated family image. To Evelyn, my past was a liability, a stain on the brand she wanted to present. To erase me was to polish the Callahan name into something glossy and false. When Helen finally left, I sat staring at the photocopied pages. My hands clenched until they shook. To be erased from a card had been painful. To have my voice stolen had been brutal. To see my son forge papers had been enraging. But this, the rewriting of my life, was deeper. It was theft of my very existence. I thought of the nights I had sung with Helen, of the applause that rose, not because I was someone's mother or someone's wife, but because I was Irene Callahan, a woman with a voice strong enough to fill a room. And now, on paper, that woman was declared fiction. The following morning, I decided I needed to hear it directly. I drove to Linda's office where she was editing her film. She looked surprised to see me, then annoyed, as though my presence disrupted her focus. I placed the pages on her desk and asked what they meant. She glanced at them casually. Oh, just a draft. It's more streamlined this way, Mom, cleaner. People don't need all the messy details. What matters is the family, the legacy. That's what people connect with. Legacy, I asked sharply. Whose legacy? Mine or yours? She rolled her eyes. Yours doesn't sell. You don't understand branding. A lounge singer doesn't fit the image. A devoted mother does. Why can't you see this is better? Better to her. Better meant lying. Better meant stripping me of identity until I was palatable for public consumption. I left before my anger erupted into words I could not take back. Back in my car, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. They had chosen convenience over truth, ambition over respect, image over blood. That night, I sat again with the microphone in my hands. Its weight was constant, grounding. I whispered into it, though it connected to nothing. They think silence is all I am, but silence is not my story. The snow fell harder outside, covering the streets, muffling the world. Inside, I burned with a determination sharper than anything I had felt in years. My children believed they could rewrite me into absence. They had forgotten one truth. I had a voice, and voices leave echoes, and I would not let mine be erased. First snow had hardened into ice when I finally saw the shape of what was happening. It came not through my children's careless words but through Evelyn's deliberate ones. She invited me to dinner at her house, though she made it clear David would be arriving late. I knew better than to believe it was a gesture of kindness. Still, I went. Because sometimes you need to look directly into the eyes of the one pulling the strings. Her house gleamed like a showroom, every ornament carefully placed, every light tuned to flatter. She poured me a glass of water, as if we were strangers at a formal meeting, then sat across from me at the polished dining table. Her smile was smooth, but her eyes held calculation. You've been upset, she began, her tones silk over steel. David tells me you're struggling to accept the direction things are going. I told her I was not struggling, I was furious, that my voice, my stories, my very life were being stripped away. She listened without flinching, then leaned closer, her voice dropping to the cadence of someone delivering instructions. This isn't personal, Irene. It's necessary. David is about to step into a public role, and every detail of our family will be scrutinized. People respect stability, tradition, dignity. They don't respect smoky bars and soldiers drinking away their nightmares. They don't respect women who sang for money in rooms full of men. They respect a mother who sacrificed everything quietly. Her words landed like blows. She was not even pretending. She was declaring openly that she considered my past shameful, unfit to be acknowledged. "You think you're helping him," I said, my hands tightening on the table. "But you're cutting me out of my own life." She tilted her head, eyes glinting. "I'm shaping a future. You should be grateful. Your children will shine because of this. And when David wins office, it will reflect on you too. Isn't that enough?" I saw then what I had suspected. Evelyn wasn't simply managing the family narrative. She was rewriting it, pruning anything that didn't fit the image she wanted. And I was at the top of her list. I left her house with ice in my veins. The night air burned cold, but it was nothing compared to the frost she left in my chest. For days afterward, I could barely eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice dismissing me as though my life's work were nothing more than dirt to be swept away. One evening, I sat again with the microphone. Its weight steadied me, but I knew it wasn't enough to fight back with memory alone. If Evelyn was building a facade, I needed proof of the truth. Not nostalgia, not stories, but undeniable evidence. It was Helen who gave me the lead. She called, her voice urgent. "There's someone you need to speak to. Do you remember Robert Klein?" I did. Robert had been a producer in those days, not the kind who chased fame, but one who believed in capturing voices honestly. He had recorded me once, a set at a lounge in Chicago. I never knew what became of those tapes. Helen told me Robert had retired, living quietly not far from here. The next morning, I drove to the address she gave me, a modest home, worn but warm, with stacks of records visible through the front window. When he opened the door, I recognized him instantly. Though the years had bent his back and silvered his hair, his eyes lit with surprise. "Irene Callahan," he said slowly, as though tasting the name. "I thought you'd forgotten us all." We sat in his cluttered living room, and I told him everything about the card, the film, the forged contract, the biography, and Evelyn's cold declaration. His face tightened as I spoke. When I finished, he stood and shuffled to a cabinet. From it, he pulled a reel-to-reel box, labeled in faded ink, "I. Callahan, 1971. "I kept this," he said. "I knew someday it would matter again." He set up an old machine, and soon my voice filled the room, younger, clearer, strong enough to shake the dust from the shelves. I closed my eyes and listened, and for a moment I felt the woman I had been standing in the room with me. Robert turned to me. "They can erase you from photographs, Irene. They can even forge papers, but they can't erase this. It's yours, and it proves who you are." I felt something harden inside me, not just anger, but resolve, sharpened to a point. Evelyn thought she was untouchable, that her image could smother the truth. But Robert had just handed me a weapon she couldn't control, proof carved into magnetic tape, impossible to deny. Before I left, Robert placed the box gently in my hands. "Don't wait too long," he said. "The longer they control the story, the harder it is to reclaim it. Use this when the time is right." Driving home, I felt a surge of strength I hadn't known in years. For the first time since the car arrived, I was no longer on the defensive. Evelyn's power came from secrecy, from her ability to weave lies unnoticed. But with Robert's recording, I could pierce that veil. That night, as snow thickened outside and lights blinked across neighbors' roofs, I placed the reel-to-reel box on the table beside the microphone, the contract, and the card. For objects now, each telling a different story. Their lie, their theft, their erasure, and my truth. I stared at them, and I whispered into the silver microphone, "You wanted silence, but I still have a voice, and soon, everyone will hear it." Robert's recording sat on my table for 3 days before I could even bring myself to touch it again. Each night, I stared at the faded label, the spool of tape inside carrying a version of me they had worked so hard to erase. When I finally lifted it into my hands, the weight felt heavier than its size allowed. It wasn't just tape, it was evidence, proof, voice. It was the difference between their fiction and my truth. Robert called on the 4th day. His voice was gravelly, years of smoke and time etched into his tone. "Irene, I've been thinking, if you want to fight this, you can't do it quietly. You have to make them choke on the truth." I told him I didn't want a scandal, that I wasn't trying to destroy my children. His answer came sharp, unbending. They've already destroyed you. All you're doing is taking back what they stole. We met the next morning in his home. He laid out the plan with precision, his hand steady as he handled the old reel. Linda's screening is next week. It's her centerpiece, her big launch. Everyone will be there: David's donors, Evelyn's circle, reporters, community leaders. If we swap out the track in her cut with this, he tapped the reel, then when the film plays, they won't hear some nameless ghost. They'll hear Irene Callahan, in her own name, her own voice. I felt a surge of fear cut through me. The idea was bold, dangerous even, but it was also undeniable. And when they demand answers, I asked, then they'll be forced to admit what they've done, or deny it and watch the truth stand louder than their lies. I left Robert's house with the reel clutched against my chest. The snow had turned to slush, the streets gray and heavy. Each step felt like walking toward a cliff, but also away from a grave. In the days that followed, I prepared myself, in silence. I took the microphone out of its place on the table and polished it until it gleamed faintly again. I sat in my living room and practiced speaking into it, not songs this time but words, short, sharp, unyielding. I told myself that when the moment came, I would not tremble. I would not falter. The night before the screening, David called. His voice was lighter than it had been in weeks. He spoke of donors secured, of momentum building, of how proud the family would be when the film premiered. He did not invite me. He simply assumed I would not come. When he hung up, I held the receiver a moment longer, then set it down. Gently, they believed I had already surrendered. They would learn differently. On the day of the event, Robert and I arrived early. The screening was held in a refurbished community hall. Polished wood floors and banners hung with Linda's logo. Technicians moved briskly, checking cables and lights. Robert moved among them like he belonged, nodding with quiet authority, slipping the reel into place while I stood back in the shadows. When Linda arrived, she floated across the room in a tailored dress, her hair styled to perfection. She greeted guests with the warmth of a woman, convinced she was at the center of history. She never once looked in my direction. Evelyn trailed behind her, calm and controlled, her eyes scanning the crowd like a general surveying her troops. David arrived last, shaking hands, his smile practiced, his voice booming. Thomas lingered on the edge, strumming a guitar idly, waiting for his turn to be acknowledged. The hall filled quickly, the murmur of conversation rising as chairs scraped against the floor. I took a seat near the back, my coat wrapped tightly around me. Robert stood near the projection booth, his posture rigid, his eyes fixed on the machine. When the lights dimmed, silence swept the room. The screen flickered to life. Linda's film began as expected images of the family posed in glowing light, words about resilience, sacrifice, unity. The audience leaned forward, drawn into her carefully constructed narrative. Then came the moment, a still image of the family hearth, the kind of shot Linda loved for its symbolism. The caption appeared, anonymous voice of strength, and then the sound rose. It was me, not the muffled copy Linda had stolen, but the full recording Robert had preserved. My voice, young and unbroken, filling the hall with the raw force of who I had been. The reel spun steadily, every note undeniable, every phrase tied irrevocably to me. The audience shifted. I saw heads turn, whispers stir. They knew this was not anonymous. They knew they were hearing someone real. I watched Linda's face in the glow of the screen. Her smile faltered, her eyes darting to the booth. Evelyn stiffened beside her, her nails digging into the armrest. David's jaw clenched, his hand tightening into a fist. Thomas looked down at his guitar, shame flashing across his face, and still my voice rang out. The film carried on, but the damage was done. The centerpiece of their image had been pierced by a truth too sharp to ignore. By the time the credits rolled, the room was buzzing with questions. Who was the singer? Why was her name absent? Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching, cameras ready. Linda stood at the front, her composure cracking. She tried to deflect, to brush it aside, but the questions pressed harder. Who is she? Where did that recording come from? Robert looked at me from across the room and gave a single nod. I rose slowly, my knees steady, my hand clutching the silver microphone I had carried with me under my coat. I walked to the front, the room parting as whispers followed me. I lifted the microphone, not to sing, but to speak. My voice carried, older now, rougher, but still mine. You ask who that is? That is me. My name is Irene Callahan. That was my voice then, and it is my voice now. You have heard what they tried to erase. Gasps rippled through the crowd. David stepped forward as if to stop me, but Evelyn caught his arm. Linda's face drained of color. Thomas looked as if he wanted to disappear. I lowered the microphone but did not step away. I had said what needed to be said. The rest was no longer under their control. As the hall erupted in murmurs and flashes of cameras, I turned and walked back to my seat. Robert was waiting, his eyes steady, his hands folded behind his back. He did not need to say anything. We both knew the tide had shifted. That night, when I returned home, I placed the microphone back on the table. For the first time in months, it did not look like a relic. It looked like a weapon, and I had finally used it. Christmas Eve arrived, sharp and cold, the streets shimmering with frost, houses glowing with lights strung across roofs and trees. The Callahan home was the brightest on the block. Every window lit, wreaths on the doors, and a driveway packed with cars. Their party had always been a showpiece, but this year it felt more like a coronation. I stood outside for a moment, my coat tight around me, the silver microphone hidden inside my bag. Robert at my side. He carried no banner, no announcement, only the quiet weight of his presence. We walked up the steps together. Music and chatter spilled out as the door opened, laughter swelling from within. A young man in a suit greeted us with surprise, clearly unprepared to see me. He hesitated, then stepped aside when Robert's gaze pinned him. We entered without waiting for permission. Inside, the house gleamed. Tables sagged under platters of food, glasses clinked in toasts, the air thick with perfume and ambition. Donors, neighbors, reporters, they were all there. And at the center of it all stood David, his arm linked with Evelyn's, smiling as though nothing in the world could touch him. Linda hovered near the photographers, orchestrating poses, while Thomas strummed in the corner, playing holiday tunes as if his conscience were numb. I felt eyes on me immediately. Whispers traveled, fast, heads turning, brows raised. They had not expected me. They had certainly not expected me to bring Robert. Evelyn's smile flickered when she spotted us, her polished calm straining for the first time. David's jaw tightened, his hand gripping his glass harder than necessary. Linda froze mid-gesture, her face pulling. Robert leaned close and murmured, "Now or never." We didn't move toward them. Instead, we stepped into the heart of the room, where the Christmas tree glowed, ornaments glittering in the soft light. The crowd's attention followed us. I reached into my bag and drew out the microphone. Its silver body caught the glow of the tree, casting reflections across the room. Gasps rippled through the guests. I raised it slowly, not to sing but to speak. My voice carried with the steadiness I had practiced for days. For years, this family has presented itself as a story of unity and honor. Tonight, I'm here to tell you another story, my own. The room hushed. Even the children at the back grew still. I held the microphone high, the light bouncing off its metal surface. This is the microphone I used when I sang to men who had returned from war with nothing but nightmares to keep them company. This is the microphone I used when my voice carried strangers through their darkest nights. And this is the microphone I used when I sang for my children in this very house, the same night they chose to erase me from their family card. Gasps spread again. Some guests exchanged uneasy glances. Others leaned forward, hungry for more. Evelyn's composure cracked. Her lips pressed so tight, they whitened. David tried to step forward, but Robert placed himself just slightly in his path, his calm presence enough to stall him. I continued. My name was cut out of photographs. My voice was stripped of credit and paraded as anonymous. My memories were stolen and sold as if they belonged to someone else. Contracts were forged, calling me incapable of deciding for myself. And now, they have even commissioned a biography to write me out of existence. The words hit like stones dropped in water, each ripple reaching further into the room. Reporters scribbled furiously, phones lifted to record. I saw the panic bloom in Linda's eyes as she realized the story she thought she controlled was unraveling. In real time, I lowered the microphone slightly and looked directly at Evelyn. You told me smoky bars and broken soldiers were shameful, that silence was a better legacy. But I will not be silent. Not anymore. The room erupted. Some gasped, some applauded, some whispered in shock. David tried to laugh it off, raising his glass as if to dismiss me. Mom's tired, he said loudly. She doesn't know what she's saying. Robert stepped forward then, his voice calm but firm. "She knows exactly what she's saying, and I can prove it." He held up a small speaker he had carried. With one motion, he pressed play. The sound that filled the room silenced every murmur. It was me, decades younger, my voice soaring in that recording Robert had preserved. The purity of it rang against the walls, cutting through the tension, like a blade. There was no mistaking it. No one could call it anonymous. The crowd erupted again, this time with awe. Some clapped, some gasped, some simply stared at me as though seeing me for the first time. My children looked stricken. Linda's knees buckled slightly, her hand gripping a chair. Thomas's guitar fell silent, his face ashen. David stood frozen, unable to muster a smile. Evelyn, for once, had nothing to say. I lifted the microphone once more, my voice clear. "You can erase me from your cards, your films, your papers, but you cannot erase the sound of a life lived fully. That voice is mine, and it always will be." The room broke into applause, polite, not forced, but genuine. Strangers clapped, some even stood, their faces lit with recognition and respect. I lowered the microphone slowly, my chest rising with steady breaths. Robert stepped beside me then, his hand resting lightly on my arm. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone told the story that I was not standing alone, no matter how hard they had tried to isolate me. In that moment, surrounded by flashing cameras and stunned silence from my family, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. They had tried to bury me under lies. Instead, I had risen above them with nothing more than the truth of my own voice. The Christmas tree sparkled behind me, the room alive with murmurs and applause. For the first time in years, I was not invisible. I was undeniable. The silence that followed my words at the Christmas gathering was deafening. Applause still echoed faintly from the back of the room, but the Callahan family at the center stood frozen in a tableau of defeat. The donors who had filled their glasses with champagne now whispered among themselves, glancing at me, then at David and Evelyn with narrowed eyes. What had once been their polished image was unraveling thread by thread before an audience too wide to contain. David tried to recover, lifting his voice with the tone he used in boardrooms and public meetings. "Friends, please, don't let one misunderstanding distract from what tonight is about. Family, unity, the future." But the words rang hollow. A man nearby asked sharply, "Then why wasn't her name on the recordings? Why wasn't she honored in the film?" Others nodded, voices rising, questions piling faster than David could swat them away. His face tightened, his smile rigid, his ambition bleeding out in real time. Evelyn stepped in, her hand on David's arm, her tone crisp and commanding. "Enough. This is not the time or place for spectacle. We will address this privately." But the reporters were already snapping photos, their pens scratching against pads. Privately was no longer an option. She had built her power on controlling the narrative, and I had just stolen that control back. Linda stood pale, her hands trembling as she tried to explain. It was creative choice. Anonymity made it universal. But the crowd wasn't buying it. One woman near the front shouted, it was her voice, "Don't tell us we didn't hear what we heard." Another asked Linda if she had forged the story to serve herself. The daughter who once prided herself on telling truths now looked like a liar caught mid-performance. Thomas, guitar still in hand, sat hunched over, his eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't try to defend himself, didn't even try to speak. His silence was its own confession. The shame of a son who had stolen his mother's stories and sold them as his own. I stood at the center of the storm, microphone still in hand, and felt no need to add another word. The proof had already sung louder than anything I could say. Robert remained by my side, arms folded, his calm gaze daring anyone to challenge what they had heard. The gathering dissolved into chaos. Guests excused themselves early, murmuring about scandal, reputations, and betrayal. Donors slipped away, their smiles gone, their confidence in David evaporated. Photographers lingered, catching every strained face, every falter in Evelyn's composure. By the time the night ended, the Callahan home was quieter than I had ever known it. My children stood in corners, their voices low, their plans crumbling. I walked out with Robert, the microphone tucked back into my bag. The cold air outside felt clean, almost merciful. Snowflakes landed on my coat as we stepped into the night, and the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift. David's campaign stalled before it began. His donors withdrew, citing trust concerns. Evelyn retreated from public life, her perfect smile no longer convincing anyone who had seen her true face that night. Linda's documentary lost its distribution deal, the network unwilling to air a film already stained with controversy. Thomas faded further into obscurity, his songs exposed for what they were, borrowed shadows of a life he had not lived. And me, for the first time in years, I was visible. Reporters called, not for gossip, but to hear my story in my own words. Community groups invited me to speak, not about scandal, but about resilience. Old recordings surfaced, dusted off by those who remembered me not as a mother to be erased, but as the woman who once sang truth into dark rooms. I did not pursue fame, I did not sue or demand retribution. I simply lived, openly, no longer hidden. The microphone sat on my table still, not as a relic, but as a reminder. I had spoken, and the world had heard. And now, as I look back, I can tell you this without hesitation. I have learned that the deepest betrayal is not being forgotten, it is being rewritten. My children thought they could replace me with a version that suited their ambitions, a silent woman, a background figure. That was their mistake. You cannot rewrite someone who refuses to vanish. You cannot bury a voice that still remembers its own sound. The truth is colder than any holiday evening, and it is this: sometimes your family will be the ones to silence you, not out of hatred, but out of ambition, shame, or fear. They will cut you out of photographs, strip your name from stories, twist your history until you no longer recognize yourself. And if you stay silent, they will succeed. But silence is not the same as peace. I learned that the hard way. Peace only comes when you take back your voice, whether with a song, a word, or a truth too sharp to be denied. You don't need to shout. You only need to speak clearly enough that the lies crack open under their own weight. So to you who are watching, to those who have felt erased in your own homes, I say this: do not wait for permission to exist. Do not hand your history over to anyone who calls it inconvenient. Hold it in your own hands, and when the moment comes, lift it high, because your story is yours, and no one, no child, no spouse, no family name has the right to take it. And if tonight you are sitting in silence, doubting your worth, let me be the one to remind you: silence itself can be a note. And when you choose, it can be the loudest note of all. Thank you for listening to my story. If you want to walk with me through more of these journeys of families, of betrayals, of voices reclaimed, then stay with me. Subscribe if you wish. I will keep speaking, because silence no longer belongs to me.